Hello, I'm Ross, and today I'm going to take you through how you can use the Responses API from OpenAI with TypeScript to interact with OpenAI's LLMs. We'll go through the setup, how you can stream a response from OpenAI, and how you can manage conversation state without using a database. Let's get started. OpenAI released a new Responses API back in March, and this is the successor to the Chat Completions API. It's now the standard way to interact with any of OpenAI's LLMs. You can check out the comparison I have linked to here in the blog post, which I'll link to in the description of the video if you'd like to follow along. The Responses API has almost all the features as of May when I'm recording this video that the Chat Completions API does. I'm going to use Domco, which is a Vite plugin that gives you a server for your Vite application, but you can use any popular server-side JavaScript framework to follow along with this tutorial, as long as it uses the web request and response APIs. I'm also going to install a few packages that we need, including the OpenAI package. I'm going to use .env to manage my environment variables. But if you're using a framework, you'll want to make sure that you're using the environment variable setup that the framework recommends. So be sure to review your framework's documentation. I'm also using Zod to validate form inputs. And then I'm also going to use a library called UI code just to get some base styles. So let's go ahead and set that up and install those packages. Now that we have installed our packages, let's get our dev server running and ensure that we're all set up. So we have our app. I'll get some base styles here with the UI code package. You can see we just have a HTML page, and this gets served from our app module, which is a fetch handler. So this default export contains a fetch method that takes in a web request and returns a web response. So this mirrors, if you're familiar with Bun, or if you're familiar with SvelteKit or Next.js, they all use this web request and response APIs. So this tutorial will work with any of those frameworks. Next step is to add a .m file to our project, and this will contain our OpenAI API key. If you're not familiar with .m files, these are local files that contain secrets to make sure that you don't commit your secrets to your Git repository. They just stay on your local computer, or wherever you deploy your app to, you can set up these environment variables within your deployment provider. So let's go ahead and add that .m file, and I'll add in my API key, and we'll also ensure that our .m file is included in our git ignore so it doesn't get committed to our Git repository. If you don't have an API key for OpenAI, you can click this link and it will take you to where you can create one. You will have to enter your credit card information, so be sure that you're using one of the cheap models when you're testing, such as the 4.1 nano model that I'm going to use today. This can get pretty expensive if you use one of the more expensive models, so just be aware of how many tokens you're using. So now that we've got our environment variables set up, we've completed the basic setup for the project, and we can work on adding our front end to our application. We're just going to make a basic form submission application that we will submit an HTML form, and it will make a request to a chat endpoint where we can return the response. So let's add a form to our HTML page, and we'll also add a client-side JavaScript script so we can enhance our form and submit our form with JavaScript. So I'll go ahead and copy this in. You can see it's just a form with the action chat, and it's going to use a post method to submit our text area input to the chat endpoint. And then once we get our response back, we're going to stream it into this div here. So we added our link to our client-side JavaScript, but we don't actually have that module created yet. So let's go ahead and create our main.ts file. And we can see if that is hooked up correctly. Okay, and you can see we've got our message logged to the console there. So now we need to add some client-side JavaScript. We'll add an event listener to our form that will execute on the submit event, and we'll handle the submission with JavaScript so we can easily stream the response into our div element. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get a reference to both of our elements that we're targeting, first the form and then the assistant, and then we'll add an event listener, which will, instead of submitting the form with HTML, we're going to submit it with JavaScript, which is what this prevent default function will do. Then we're going to set our div inner HTML to loading just to give a little loading state. And then we're going to get the action in the method from the form, which is just our attributes here, which will be passed through JavaScript then. And those are actual properties on the form element, so we can access them easily. We can get our form data by using the form data class constructor, and that will be the body of our response. So you can say new form data and then pass in the form element, and that will give you all of the form data. So whatever's in our text area element will be entered into there. Next, we'll make a request to our API endpoint, which we haven't created yet. We'll do that in the next step. So we're going to fetch to our action, which will be /chat, and we're going to use the method from the form, and then the content from the text area will be our body. Finally, we'll get a stream from the response body. So response.body is a stream, and we're going to pipe it through a text decoder stream. And get the reader on that so we can iterate through and stream the response. If the response is not okay, or we don't have our reader, we're just going to give a little error message there. And then if the response is okay, we'll set our inner HTML back to the empty string to start out with to get rid of our loading state. And then we'll iterate through the response body. We'll append each value to the div's inner HTML. So pretty simple. There's probably better ways to do this, but this is just a bare bones example on how you can use vanilla JavaScript to send this request and stream it back. So let's copy that into our main.ts file. And let's go ahead and test it out. You'll see loading flash, and then you can see nope, because we don't have our chat endpoint created yet. So that's what we'll do next. So on the server, we're going to access this form data to know which message the user has sent. So kind of the same object will be passed from the client to the server in the response body, and we'll make our chat endpoint to read that data. So the first thing we're going to check, and if you might have a router that does a lot of this for you. If you're familiar with Hono or Express or something like that, you can do like app.post and then /chat will be your path name, but we're just going to do it with vanilla JavaScript here. So we'll say if our URL.pathname is /chat and our request.method is post, then we're going to get our form data, and we'll need to make our fetch function async. And let's just log that out to make sure that we can get our message here. I think I've named it message. So whatever this text area is named, so here we have name message, that will be grabbed and submitted in our request body, and we can get that in request.form data here, and we'll call data.getMessage to get that message. So let's check and make sure that's working correctly. And you can see we have test log to the console there. We'll just try it a few different times here, and you can see whatever's logged. Whenever you're reading user input on the server, you'll want to make sure that users are submitting the information that you expect. People can submit without actually using your text area to this endpoint. So we'll want to make sure that this message is actually a string. And a library like Zod can do this for you very easily. So we'll just use the z.string method from Zod. And I'll need to import that here. And then we'll pass data.getMessage into the parse method of our z.string schema. And if it's an empty message, we'll just add in a little conditional here and make sure that if it's an empty message, we're also handling that and submitting it anyway. So let's just send that back for now. And we'll send it just as a text response. Test that out here. So we should get a response back, and it should just be whatever we send. So you can see we have test there. We can try something else, and it will always just put back whatever we send. So this is a basic working example of just a JavaScript form, and you can see we're getting whatever the server sends back, we're reading it, and we're appending it as the inner HTML. So this isn't very useful yet, but we're going to add in a request to OpenAI, and then instead of just returning our message back, we'll return the message from the chat assistant back. So this is where we'll use the OpenAI package. So the first thing we're going to do is just create another module called AI. And in here, we're going to import .env to get our environment variables and the OpenAI package. And we'll just do a little check to see if we have that OpenAI key set for sure, and throw an error if we don't. And then we're going to create an OpenAI client with that OpenAI key, since we know that it's set. And we'll export that, and we can import it in our So now we can import our AI module in our app module. And instead of just sending back the response, we will create a new OpenAI response. And you can see we have all these different things available to us on the client. And what we're looking for is the Responses API. And everything with the Responses API is contained inside of here. And we'll create a response. And our response input will just be the message. Input can be a variety of different types. So if you need to send more than one input, you can. But it can also just be a string, which we're going to use here. And then model, which we're just going to be using the GPT 4.1 Nano model, which is the cheapest model right now. But you can see they've got nice type completion for any of the available models that you can try out and use with the Responses API. And that is all we need to do to send a message to OpenAI. And instead of sending our message back now, we can send our response.output text, and that will be the buffered output of the message. So now we should see a response from OpenAI here. And you can see, hello, how can I assist you today? So we've got our assistant hooked up. Right now, our API does not stream the response. So we're waiting for the entire response to arrive on the server before we send the whole output text to the client. So we can speed up our proceed response time if we stream the response so the user can start reading the message as it's generated back. So we need to add in the stream property to our create argument, and we'll say stream true. And this, you can see now we're getting an error here because response is no longer the response object, but it is an async iterable stream. So now we need to iterate through the stream and create a new readable stream body to handle the stream that we can return in our response constructor here. So we're going to create a new body, which we're going to pass back into here. And that's going to be a new readable stream of strings. And it's going to have an asynchronous method of start, and C is our controller. And then inside of this start method, we're going to iterate through the events of the async iterable response that we've created with the Responses API. And we'll close stream once we're done iterating through those responses. So with streaming, there's lots of different event types that the response produces. So we're going to check our event type. And if it equals our response.outputText.delta, that signals that there is a change in our output text. So you can remember from before, we had the final output text at the end. This represents each iterative change in the output text as it's being streamed back. So for each one of those events, we're going to enqueue the change in the text. And what enqueue does is it'll send it in our stream. And finally, if we're going to do this properly, we'll pipe it through a text encoder stream, which will change it to a uint array stream instead of a stream of strings. And we've already passed it into our response body. So let's go ahead and test that out, and we can see if we are streaming now. And you can see we get the stream of text instead of the buffered response now. So now how can we persist the conversation state? OpenAI can actually handle this for you now. Each conversation uses a unique ID. So you can use this ID to send back and say, hey, I'm still using this same conversation. Look back on the previous messages and add to that conversation. So what we need to do when we're streaming is we're going to obtain the ID from our form data and then pass it to the previous response ID property. We'll set store to true to instruct OpenAI to store this conversation. So that's the first thing we're going to do here. So there's the previous response ID, which we'll get from the client. And then we'll set store to true. And we need to obtain this ID somehow. So what we're going to do is when you're streaming, you have to look for the response.completed event instead of the ID being directly on this response object. It comes at the end. So as we're streaming, we're going to check and see if the event.type equals response.completed. And then we'll enqueue that event.response.id and send it to the client. And we'll need to edit our client-side JavaScript here. This will just create a hidden input element to store that ID at the end of the response. And we'll put that into our form and we'll send it back if we have that input element. And if we don't, we won't send that hidden input and we won't have a previous response ID. So now we've got that set up on the client to send back if we have a previous response ID. So we need to also get the ID on the server, which we'll do in the same way that we got our message. And here we'll have it be nullable because maybe they don't have a previous response ID if it's the first message. And we'll pass that into the previous response ID argument here. We also need to add in if there's not an ID already. We only need to send this if there isn't an ID already from the client. Now we have that all set up. Our assistant should remember our previous messages now without using a database. This is just using the OpenAI API. So I'll say, hello, my name is Ross. And then let's ask it, what's my name? And it remembers my name from before without having to save our previous chats. And if we look in our HTML here, you can see we have a hidden form element, and that stores my response ID here. So that's how we're sending that back each time with this conversation now. Finally, we just have kind of a tip at the end. If you need to retrieve all your previous messages, so if you're going to display all of them in your UI, you can use this little snippet to make 2 requests to the Responses API to receive all the previous messages except for the latest, and then to get the latest messages, or the latest message, you'll have to use the retrieve method. So that's a quick rundown on how to use the Responses API with TypeScript. It's a nice way to interact with OpenAI's LLM. The final project is located on GitHub if you're interested in taking a look. Thanks for watching this video and reading this article. Let me know if you like this video. Hit the thumbs up or subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. Thanks for watching.